The first thing you need to understand about Evan Holt is that he wasn't a killer by nature. He was a killer by circumstance, which is somehow worse. He sat in the back corner of the Dennison Estates library, a room that smelled like old money and older secrets, while Victor Crosswell laid out the job. Crosswell didn't look like the kind of man who orchestrated land theft across 3 territories. He looked like a banker. Soft hands, clean nails, the kind of voice that could convince you to sign your life away and thank him for the pen. "The homesteaders won't budge," Crosswell said, sliding a leather pouch across the mahogany table. It landed with the dull clink of gold. "They've been offered fair market value. More than fair, actually, but they've got this stubborn notion that the land is theirs by some divine right." Evan picked up the pouch but didn't open it. "And you want me to convince them otherwise?" "I want you to be someone else," Crosswell said. He pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket and spread it flat. The headline was 6 months old. "Legendary gunfighter Cole Ardan leaves 3 dead in Silver Ridge standoff." Evan had heard the name. Everyone had. Cole Ardan was the kind of legend that grew in saloons and shrank in daylight, except the shrinking never quite happened because the man kept living up to the stories. "You want me to pretend to be Cole Ardan?" "I want you to be Cole Ardan," Crosswell corrected. "For 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Just long enough to create the right atmosphere. Fear is cheaper than bullets, Mr. Holt, and significantly less messy." Evan should have walked out. He knew that even then, but the pouch was heavy and his pockets were empty, and there's a particular kind of desperation that makes a man trade his conscience for cash and tell himself it's just business. "What if the real Cole Ardan shows up?" Crosswell smiled. "He won't. He's 3 states away chasing some vendetta in Colorado. By the time he hears about this, if he hears about it, you'll be long gone and considerably richer." That should have been Evan's second warning. The first was accepting the job at all. Harlan's Creek, Kansas, was the kind of town that existed because someone once thought it might matter and then stopped thinking about it entirely. 1 main street, a saloon that doubled as a town hall, a general store that sold everything except hope. And surrounding it, stretching out like a promise someone forgot to keep, were the homesteads. Evan rode in on a stolen reputation and a horse he'd bought with Crosswell's advance payment. He'd practiced the walk, that particular swagger that comes from knowing you're the most dangerous thing in any room. He'd let his stubble grow out. He wore a hat tilted just enough to shadow his face, but not enough to hide it. He wanted to be seen. That was the whole point. The saloon went quiet when he walked in. Not silent. Quiet is different. Silent means surprise. Quiet means recognition. Quiet means fear. "Whiskey," Evan said, and his voice came out rougher than usual. He'd been working on that too. The bartender, a man named Pete with a scar that ran from his ear to his collarbone, poured with shaking hands. "That'll be—" "I'll cover it," said a voice from the corner. Evan turned slowly. A man in his 50s, weathered and wire-thin, stood with his hat in his hands. He had the look of someone who'd spent his whole life fighting soil that didn't want to grow anything. "Robert Hale," the man said. "I run the homestead 2 miles north." "I didn't ask." "I know who you are." Evan let the silence stretch. This was the moment. This was what Crosswell paid for. "Then you know I don't make social calls," Evan said. Robert Hale didn't blink. "The Dennisons sent you." "Nobody sends me anywhere. I go where I want." "And you just happen to want to be here, in a town where 3 families are being squeezed off their land." Hale's voice was steady, but Evan could see his jaw working. "Convenient timing." Evan tossed back the whiskey. It burned, which helped sell what came next. "The land doesn't care who works it. The land doesn't care who bleeds on it. You're smart, you'll take the money and move on. And if I'm not smart?" Evan met his eyes. "Then you'll move on anyway, just in a different direction." He left 3 gold coins on the bar, overpayment by a mile, and walked out. The performance was perfect. He could feel eyes on his back, could feel the story already forming in the air behind him. By nightfall, everyone in Harlan's Creek would know that Cole Ardan had arrived and that the homesteader's time was running out. What Evan didn't see was the boy watching from the corner. Luke Hale, 12 years old, with his father's eyes and his mother's early grave. The kid didn't look scared. He looked like he was memorizing something. Tous. The Dennison enforcers arrived 3 days later. Evan wasn't supposed to be there for that part. He was supposed to be the ghost, the rumor, the threat that made actual violence unnecessary. But things don't always go according to plan, especially when the plan is built on a foundation of lies. He was riding the property line when he heard the gunshots. Evan had never killed anyone before that day. He'd drawn on men, sure. He'd gotten close. But there's a difference between almost and actually, and that difference is the kind of thing that stays with you. Robert Hale's homestead was burning when Evan arrived. Not the whole thing, just the barn. Smoke rose black and thick against the afternoon sky. Two men in Denison colors stood in the yard, and Robert Hale was on his knees between them. Evan pulled his horse up short. This wasn't the plan. This was never supposed to be the plan. "Hey!" one of the enforcers shouted. "You Ardan?" Evan's hand went to his gun without thinking. "What happened here?" "Old man got stubborn, took a shot at us." The enforcer shrugged. "We're just defending ourselves." That's when Evan saw the rifle. It was still holstered on Hale's horse 20 feet away. The old man hadn't drawn anything. "This doesn't—" Evan started, but Robert Hale interrupted him. "You did this," Hale said, and his voice was wet with blood. "You brought them here. You put on that name and—" The enforcer shot him, just like that. No warning, no hesitation. The sound cracked across the prairie, and Robert Hale fell forward into the dirt of the land he'd refused to surrender. Evan's gun was in his hand before he realized he'd drawn it. The enforcer who'd fired was already turning, already raising his weapon again. Evan shot him in the chest. The second enforcer went for his gun, and Evan shot him too. Then there was just silence and smoke and three bodies that would all be blamed on Cole Ardan. Because that's who Evan was now. That's who the town would say did this. He heard the scream from the house. The boy, Luke, came running out, and Evan knew he should leave, should ride away, and let this story tell itself. But he couldn't move. He just stood there while a 12-year-old kid fell to his knees beside his father's body and made sounds that no child should ever have to make. "I'm sorry," Evan said, and the words felt like ash in his mouth. Luke looked up at him with eyes that would never be young again. "You're Cole Ardan." Evan opened his mouth to deny it, to explain, to tell this kid that it was all a lie, all a performance, that he'd never meant for any of this to happen. But what came out was worse. "Yeah, I'm Cole Ardan." Because in that moment, under the weight of what he'd done, the lie felt like the only truth he had left. Two more homesteaders died in the next week, Thomas Greaves and his brother William. They were found at the bottom of a ravine, their wagon overturned, their horses scattered. The sheriff ruled it an accident, but everyone in Harlan's Creek knew better. Cole Ardan had come to town, and the dying had started. Evan tried to leave. He saddled his horse at dawn, packed his saddlebags with the gold Crosswell had given him, and pointed himself east. He made it 5 miles before he stopped. The problem with wearing another man's name is that you start to carry his weight. Every story about Cole Ardan that Evan had ever heard came back to him on that empty stretch of prairie. The man who shot 3 lawmen in Silver Ridge. The man who walked into a saloon full of bounty hunters and walked out alone. The man who never missed and never apologized. Evan had put on that reputation like armor, but armor works both ways. It protects you from the outside world, and it traps you inside yourself. He turned his horse around and rode back to Harlan's Creek. This time, he didn't go to the saloon. He went to the church, a small wooden building that looked like it might blow away in a strong wind. The Reverend was surprised to see him, but not unwelcoming. That's the thing about small-town preachers. They've seen enough darkness to know that judgment is a luxury they can't afford. "I need to confess something," Evan said. The Reverend gestured to a pew. "I'm listening." "I'm not who everyone thinks I am." "None of us are, son." Evan shook his head. I'm literally not. My name isn't Cole Ardan. It's Evan Holt. I was hired to pretend, to scare people, to clear them off their land so the Denison family could buy it cheap and sell it to the railroad at a profit. The Reverend was quiet for a long moment. "And the men who died? I killed 2 of them. The Denison enforcers. They shot Robert Hale, and I—" Evan's voice broke. "I shot them. The other 2, the Greaves brothers, I didn't have anything to do with that. But it'll be blamed on me anyway, on the name I'm wearing. So take it off." "It's not that simple." It never is, the Reverend said. But doing the right thing rarely is. You can't unspill blood, Mr. Holt, but you can stop spilling more. Evan left the church with no answers, just a heavier burden. He'd come looking for absolution and found only the truth, that forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn through everything that comes after. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the real Cole Ardan was already 3 days' ride away and closing fast. Cole Ardan heard about Harlan's Creek from a bounty hunter in Dodge City. The man was drunk and bitter, complaining about how all the best work was drying up because that bastard Ardan is killing everyone before the bounties even get posted. Cole had been nursing a beer at the far end of the bar, half listening to the usual saloon noise, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of cards, the lies men tell when they think nobody important is listening. But his name cut through all of it like a knife. "What was that?" Cole asked. The bounty hunter turned, squinting through whiskey-blurred vision. "I said Arden's making it hard for honest work. Just tore through some town in Kansas, Harlan's Creek, killed 3 homesteaders and a couple of hired guns. Real bloodbath, from what I heard." Cole set down his beer very carefully. "When? Week ago? Maybe 2? Why do you—" The bounty hunter's eyes went wide. "Oh, hell. You're him." "No," Cole said quietly. "But I'm about to find out who is." He left Dodge City that night and didn't stop except to water his horse and confirm the details. By the time he reached the Kansas border, he'd heard 7 different versions of what happened in Harlan's Creek. In one version, Cole Ardan killed 5 men in a fair fight. In another, he burned down the homesteads himself. In a third, he was working for a mysterious benefactor who wanted to clear the territory for development. That last version was close enough to the truth to make Cole's jaw tight. Someone was using his name, using his reputation, and people were dying because of it. Cole had killed men before, more than he liked to count, but every single one of them had been looking at him when it happened. Every single one had known who pulled the trigger. There was a code to that, a terrible kind of honesty. This was different. This was theft. Someone had stolen his identity and weaponized it, and Cole was going to get it back. The town of Harlan's Creek appeared on the horizon just after dawn on his 5th day of riding. It looked like every other dying frontier town, desperate and defiant in equal measure. Cole rode in slowly, his hat pulled low, his gun hand relaxed but ready. He hitched his horse outside the general store and went inside. The shopkeeper, a woman in her 60s with suspicious eyes, barely looked up. "Help you?" "Information," Cole said. "I'm looking for someone." "Aren't we all?" Cole put a silver dollar on the counter. "I'm looking for Cole Ardan." The shopkeeper's hand froze halfway to the coin. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She looked at him then, really looked, and whatever she saw made her step back. "You're—" "Yeah. He's staying at the boarding house. Or he was. Haven't seen him in a few days." Her voice dropped. "You here to kill him?" "I'm here to meet him," Cole said. "What happens after that depends on him." He left the silver dollar and walked out. The boarding house was easy to find. It was the only 2-story building in town. The landlady was more helpful than the shopkeeper, possibly because she was too tired to be anything else. Room 3. Upstairs. "He's paid through the week, but I haven't seen him since yesterday morning." Cole climbed the stairs with his hand near his gun. He'd been ambushed before, and he wasn't interested in repeating the experience. But when he reached room 3 and kicked the door open, the room was empty. Empty, but occupied. There were clothes on the chair, boots by the bed, a gun belt hanging on the bedpost, and on the small table by the window, a newspaper clipping about the Silver Ridge shootout. Cole picked it up. The paper was worn at the edges, like someone had folded and unfolded it many times, like someone had been studying it. He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned just as a man appeared in the doorway. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Evan Holt was younger than Cole expected. Mid-20s, maybe. He had the kind of face that hadn't yet decided what kind of man it belonged to. And his eyes had the hollow look of someone who'd recently discovered that consequences were real. "You're him," Evan said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "I didn't know you were coming." "I didn't send word," Cole gestured to the newspaper clipping. "You've been doing your research." Evan's hand drifted toward his gun, then stopped. He seemed to realize how pointless that would be. I can explain. You better. And Evan did. He told Cole everything. Crosswell, the Dennisons, the job, the gold, the performance. He told him about Robert Hale and the enforcers, and the moment when the lie became murder. He told him about the Greaves brothers and the town's fear and the way a borrowed name could become a cage. Cole listened without interrupting. When Evan finished, the room was quiet except for the sound of wind rattling the window. So you're sorry, Cole said finally. I am. That doesn't bring them back. I know. Cole walked to the window and looked out at Harlan's Creek. It was a nothing town in a nowhere part of the world, and 3 men had died here because someone thought their land was worth more than their lives. The Dennisons still pushing? Cole asked. They're waiting for me to finish the job, to scare off the last few holdouts. And Crosswell? He's the mastermind. He's been doing this across 3 territories, using shell companies, corrupt land brokers, hired guns. The Dennisons are just the local muscle. Cole turned from the window. You're going to help me stop him. Evan blinked. What? You heard me. You put on my name and got people killed. Now you're going to wear it a little longer and help me tear down the people who paid you to do it. I don't understand. Cole's smile was cold. You're about to. So, the plan was simple, which was the only kind of plan that ever worked. Evan would continue being Cole Ardan, the legend, the ghost, the killer. But this time, he'd be working against the Dennisons instead of for them. Cole would be the shadow, the real threat, the consequence that the Dennisons couldn't see coming. They'll kill you when they find out, Evan said. They'll try, Cole corrected, but first they have to find out, and that's where you come in. They started with the small fish, the land brokers who'd been falsifying documents, the surveyors who'd been marking property lines in the wrong places, the lawyers who'd been drawing up contracts that wouldn't hold up in any honest court. Cole had a particular talent for making men talk. It wasn't about violence, though he could deliver that when necessary. It was about presence, about making someone understand on a cellular level that lying to Cole Ardan was a worse fate than telling the truth. Within a week, they had a paper trail. Deeds, contracts, correspondence, proof that the Dennison land grab was part of a larger operation stretching from Kansas to Colorado to New Mexico. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a web of legal documents, was Victor Crosswell. He's smart, Evans said, looking at the documents they'd spread across the table in his boarding house room. He never puts his name on anything directly. It's all shell companies and proxy agents. Smart doesn't mean untouchable, Cole said. It just means we have to work harder. That's when they heard the gunshots from downstairs. Cole was moving before the echoes faded. He went through the door low and fast, his gun already in his hand. Evan followed, slower but learning. The boarding house lobby was chaos. 3 men, Dennison enforcers, judging by their colors, were backing the landlady against the wall. One of them had a gun pointed at her head. "Where's Ardan?" the enforcer demanded. "I don't know what you're—" He cocked the hammer. "Wrong answer. She doesn't know because I'm right here," Cole said from the stairs. All 3 enforcers turned. They saw Evan first, standing behind Cole, and their faces registered confusion. Then they saw Cole, and confusion turned to calculation. "There's 2 of them," one of the enforcers said. "No," Cole corrected. "There's one of me. And the man you've been taking orders from." The lead enforcer's eyes narrowed. "You're not—" Cole shot him. Not to kill. In the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. The other 2 went for their guns, and that's when Evan made his choice. He could have run. Could have let Cole handle it. Could have pretended he was still on the Dennison side. Instead, he drew his gun and shot the second enforcer in the leg. The third one got a shot off, but he was panicking, and panicked shots go wide. Cole's didn't. The enforcer went down hard, clutching his side and gasping. "Upstairs," Cole told the landlady. "Now." She didn't argue. Cole walked to the lead enforcer, who was bleeding and furious and scared. "Here's what you're going to tell the Dennisons. Tell them Cole Ardan is coming, the real one. Tell them their hired actor just switched sides, and tell them that everyone who profited from those homesteader deaths is going to pay in full. They'll kill you both," the enforcer spat. "They'll try," Cole said again, "but I've got better odds than you do right now." He left them alive. Wounded, terrified, but alive. Because dead men can't deliver messages, and Cole wanted the denizens to know exactly what was coming. As they rode out of Harlan's Creek an hour later, Cole on his horse, Evan on his, the documents packed in saddlebags, Evan finally asked the question that had been eating at him. "Why are you helping me? I stole your name, got people killed under it. You should want me dead." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "A man I respected once told me that revenge is just another kind of prison. You lock yourself in it, and the person you're avenging never gets the key." He glanced at Evan. "You made a mistake, a bad one. But you're trying to fix it. That counts for something. Does it count enough? Ask me when this is over." They rode on into the gathering dark, two men carrying the same name for very different reasons, heading toward a confrontation that would determine whether legends could ever really die, or if they just kept getting recycled, one borrowed reputation at a time. Behind them, in Harlan's Creek, Luke Hale stood at his father's grave and made a promise. He was too young to understand that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. He was too angry to care. And somewhere in the distance, in an estate that smelled like old money and older sins, Victor Crosswell received word that the situation in Kansas had just become significantly more complicated. The chess pieces were moving, the board was set, and the endgame was about to begin. The safe house was a converted grain storage 15 miles outside Harlan's Creek, abandoned years ago when the railroad promised prosperity and delivered bankruptcy instead. Cole had found it on his second day in Kansas, the kind of place that existed in the gaps between what maps claimed and what actually was. Evan spread the documents across the warped floorboards while Cole checked the perimeter. The papers told a story uglier than either of them had expected. Victor Crosswell wasn't just stealing land. He was creating a pipeline. Homesteaders forced out, land consolidated, then sold to the railroad at inflated prices. The railroad got its route, Crosswell got rich, and the families who'd broken their backs turning prairie into farms got nothing except the choice between a buyout that wouldn't cover their debts or a bullet that would end the conversation permanently. "There's at least 40 families across 3 territories, Evan said when Cole came back inside. "Maybe more. The records only go back 18 months, and something tells me this operation is older than that." Cole crouched beside him, studying a contract dated 6 months earlier. "This one's signed by a Margaret Chen. You know her?" "No, but I recognize the witness signature, James Keller. He's a land broker out of Topeka, works exclusively for Crosswell's shell companies." "Worked," Cole corrected. Past tense. "He's the 3rd name on our list." They'd made that list together over the past 2 days. 7 names. 7 men who'd built fortunes on other people's displacement. The land brokers were bottom feeders. They got a cut for facilitating the sales and asking no questions about why families were suddenly so eager to leave land they'd fought to keep. Above them were the lawyers who drafted contracts that looked legal until you read them with someone who actually understood property law. And above them all sat Crosswell, orchestrating everything from an office in Kansas City that probably smelled like expensive cigars and casual cruelty. "Keller won't talk," Evan said. "I met him once. He's the type who thinks loyalty buys protection." "Everyone talks," Cole said. "You just have to ask the right way." Evan looked at him. "I don't want to know what that means, do I?" "Probably not." Cole stood, stretching out the stiffness from 2 days of hard riding. "But here's what you need to understand. These men aren't going to roll over because we ask nicely. They're going to fight. They're going to lie. And some of them are going to try to kill us before we get close enough to make them uncomfortable. So we hit them first." "No, we make them think we're going to hit them first. There's a difference." Cole walked to the window, looking out at the darkening prairie. "Fear makes people stupid. Stupid people make mistakes. And mistakes give us openings." "You sound like you've done this before." Cole's laugh was dry. "I've been on both sides of this kind of fight. Sometimes wearing a badge, sometimes not. The badge doesn't change the fundamentals. Power protects power until something more powerful comes along." Evan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about your reputation. You could have killed me in that boarding house and been done with it." Cole didn't answer right away. He watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if the world beneath them wasn't so broken. "I knew a man once," Cole said finally. "Good man. Honest. He had a small ranch in New Mexico, raised horses. Not fancy stock, just solid animals that could work. A land speculator wanted his property for a rail spur. Made him an offer. Man refused. Week later, someone burned his barn. Month after that, someone shot his wife. Evan felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened? I happened. The speculator hired me to finish what the barn burning started. Paid me good money to convince this rancher that fighting was pointless. Cole's voice was flat, emotionless. I took the job. Rode out there. Found the man sitting on his porch with a rifle across his knees and grief in his eyes that would have broken stone. He knew why I was there. Didn't even argue. Just asked me to make it quick so he could see his wife again. Did you? No. Cole turned from the window. I shot the speculator instead. Turned out he'd hired 3 other men for the same job, figuring one of us would get it done. I convinced the other 2 that changing careers was in their best interest. The rancher got to keep his land. I got a price on my head that took me 2 years to shake. Evan processed that. So this is redemption. Redemption's too clean a word for it. This is just making sure that what I didn't do then keeps not happening now. Cole grabbed his coat. Get some sleep. We're riding to Topeka before dawn. To find Keller. To make him wish we hadn't. Evan lay down on the floor, using his saddle as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, he could hear Cole moving around, checking their horses, probably not sleeping. The man seemed to run on something other than rest. Some internal fuel made of old choices and newer attempts to balance scales that could never truly be even. Evan closed his eyes and saw Robert Hale falling. Saw the boy's face. Saw the way a borrowed name had become a murder weapon. He'd wanted to be someone else so badly that he'd stopped being anyone at all. Sleep came eventually, but it didn't bring relief. They left the safe house at 4 a.m. when the world was still dark and the air tasted like frost. Cole rode with the ease of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on his feet. Evan rode like someone still learning that sitting a saddle for 12 hours wasn't a skill you could fake. Topeka was a full day's ride if they pushed. They pushed. They stopped once, at a creek that probably had a name, but neither of them knew it. While the horses drank, Cole pulled out the documents again, studying Keller's contracts with the focus of a man reading his enemy's diary. He's smart, Cole said. Everything's technically legal. The intimidation happens off the books, but the sales themselves look clean. How do we prove Crosswell's involved if there's no paper trail? We don't prove it. We make Keller give it to us. Cole folded the papers. Man like that has kept records. Insurance policy in case Crosswell decides to cut him loose. We just need to convince him that his insurance policy is worth more than his loyalty. They reached Topeka as the sun was setting. It was bigger than Harlan's Creek. Bigger than any town Evan had seen in months. Real streets, real buildings. The kind of place where you could pretend civilization had actually arrived and wasn't just passing through. Keller's office was above a barbershop on 2nd Street. The sign outside read, Keller and Associates, Land Acquisition Specialists. Cole looked at it and smiled. Acquisition Specialists, he said. That's one way to spell theft. They didn't go in this front. Cole had a rule about front doors. They were for people who wanted to be seen leaving. They waited until full dark, then climbed the back stairs. The door at the top had a lock that Cole opened with a piece of wire and about 15 seconds of work. The office was exactly what Evan expected. Neat desk, filing cabinets, a painting of a landscape that probably cost more than most families made in a year. And behind the desk, asleep in his chair with an empty whiskey bottle at his elbow, was James Keller. Cole walked over and slapped him awake. Keller jerked upright, eyes wide, reaching for something in his desk drawer. Cole's gun was already out. Don't, Cole said. Keller froze. He was in his 40s, soft around the middle, with the kind of face that probably smiled easily when he was taking your money. Right now, he looked like a man who just realized that consequences were real and standing in his office. Who the hell? He stopped when he saw Evan. Holt? What are you doing here? Changing careers, Evan said. Keller's eyes went from Evan to Cole and back again. If this is about more money, you should talk to Crosswell. I just facilitate. We're not here about money, Cole interrupted. We're here about records. I don't know what you mean. Cole pulled back the hammer on his gun. The click was very loud in the quiet office. Let me rephrase. We're here about the records you've been keeping. The ones that prove Crosswell's been running an illegal land grab across 3 territories. The ones you've been saving in case he decides you're a liability. Keller's face went pale. How did you... Because you're smart, Cole said. And smart men don't work for people like Crosswell without keeping leverage. So where are they? For a moment, Keller looked like he might refuse, might try to bluff his way out. Then he looked at Cole's eyes, really looked, and whatever he saw there made the fight drain out of him. Filing cabinet, he said quietly. Bottom drawer. Hidden compartment in the back. Evan found the compartment. Inside was a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. He pulled it out and started reading. Oh, hell, Evan breathed. Cole glanced over. What? This isn't just Kansas. This is Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming. There's documentation going back 4 years. Evan looked at Keller. How many families? Keller didn't answer. How many? Cole asked, and his voice could have cut glass. I don't know, 100, 150? I stopped counting. Keller's hands were shaking. Look, I just processed the sales. What happened before that? The intimidation, the violence? That wasn't my department. No, Cole said. You just profited from it. That makes you an accessory to murder. Murder? I never... Robert Hale, Thomas and William Greaves. Those are just the ones in Harlan's Creek. How many others died because they wouldn't sell? Cole leaned forward. How many families are buried in the land Crosswell stole? Keller looked sick. I want a deal. You're not in a position to negotiate. Federal authorities, I'll testify. Give them everything I have on Crosswell's operation. But I want immunity. Cole and Evan exchanged glances. They hadn't planned for this. Hadn't expected Keller to break so easily. But here it was. A way to bring the whole operation down through legal channels instead of just burning it to the ground. We'll arrange it, Cole said. But you're coming with us now. And if you run, if you warn Crosswell, if you do anything except exactly what we tell you, I won't, Keller said quickly. I swear. They took him out the back way, Evan carrying the portfolio, Cole keeping his gun trained on Keller's spine. They'd just reached the alley when the shooting started. 2 men, Denison enforcers had to be, opened up from the opposite end of the alley. Cole shoved Keller behind a stack of crates and returned fire. Evan ducked behind a rain barrel, his heart hammering. How did they know? Evan shouted. Doesn't matter. Cole shot twice, driving one of the enforcers back. We need to move. But more men were coming. Evan could hear them. Boots on cobblestones, voices calling coordinates. This wasn't just 2 enforcers. This was a coordinated hit. The documents, Keller screamed. They want the documents. Cole grabbed Evan's shoulder. Get him out of here. Back to the safe house. I'll hold them. You'll die. I'll slow them down. Now move. Evan wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight. But he looked at the portfolio in his hands, the evidence that could bring down Crosswell's entire operation, and made the calculation that Cole had already made. The mission mattered more than any one man. He grabbed Keller and ran. Behind him, Cole's gun spoke in steady, measured bursts. Evan didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. He just ran through the dark streets of Topeka with a terrified land broker and a leather case full of other people's misery. They made it to the horses. Evan threw Keller onto one and swung up on his own. The gunfire from the alley was continuous now. Multiple weapons, different calibers. Cole was outnumbered, outgunned, and buying them time with his life. Evan kicked his horse into a gallop and rode hard into the night. The safe house seemed smaller than Evan remembered. Or maybe it was just that Keller filled it with nervous energy, pacing back and forth while Evan lit a lamp and tried not to think about whether Cole was still breathing. We have to keep moving, Keller said. If they found me, they'll find us here. Then they'll find us, Evan said. I'm not running until I know, The door opened. Both men spun, reaching for weapons they didn't have. Cole stood in the doorway, bleeding from his left arm, and looking like he'd been dragged behind a horse for a mile. You're alive, Evan said. Disappointed? Cole limped inside and sat heavily on a crate. 3 enforcers dead, 2 wounded. Lost them in the East Side slums. He looked at Keller. They knew you'd flip. How? Keller's face was ash gray. I might have contacted Crosswell yesterday. Told him I was nervous about the Harlan's Creek situation. Asked for reassurance. You warned him, Evan said flatly. I was scared. He said everything was under control, that Ardan, that you, he looked at Evan, that you'd finish the job and we'd all be paid out within a month. I didn't know he'd send killers. Cole stood up, wincing. Doesn't matter now. They know we have the documents. They'll come at us with everything. So what do? We use what we have while we still have it. Cole pulled out a map. There's a federal marshal 3 days' ride north in Junction City, Thomas Brennan. I know him from the Colorado Range Wars. He's honest, which means he's rare. We get these documents to him, he can start building a case. 3 days is a long time, Evan said. It's what we've got. Cole looked at them both. Keller, you're our insurance policy. You testify, you walk, you run, you hang. Clear? Keller nodded miserably. They left at first light, riding north with the documents in Evan's saddlebag, and death probably somewhere behind them. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and indifferent, and exactly the kind of place where a man could disappear forever. They made good time the first day, stopped only to water the horses and eat jerky that tasted like leather. Keller complained constantly about the pace, the saddle, the heat, the cold, everything except his own role in creating the situation they were all running from. Does he ever shut up? Evan asked when Keller had wandered off to relieve himself. Men like that don't, Cole said. They fill silence with noise because if they stop talking, they might have to think about what they've done. You think Brennan will actually do something with the evidence? I think he'll try. Whether he succeeds depends on how deep Crosswell's corruption runs. Cole checked his arm. The wound from Topeka was starting to smell wrong. Federal law moves slow. By the time charges get filed, Crosswell could be in Mexico. So we're doing this for nothing. We're doing this so there's a record, so someone knows. That matters, even if it doesn't feel like it. They rode on. The sun climbed, peaked, started its descent, and somewhere around mid-afternoon, Evan realized they were being followed. 2 riders, Cole said before Evan could speak. Maybe 3 miles back. Been there since noon. Denison men? Probably. Or bounty hunters who heard there's money on my head and yours. Cole's hand drifted to his gun. Either way, they're tracking us. Question is whether they're alone. They found out that night. They'd stopped in a shallow ravine, hoping the geography would hide their fire. Keller was asleep, or pretending to be, while Cole and Evan took turns on watch. Evan had the midnight shift when he heard the horses. Not 2, more like 6. He shook Cole awake. The older gunfighter came alert instantly, gun already in hand. How many? Cole whispered. 6, maybe 7? Denisons or bounty hunters? Does it matter? Cole smiled without humor. Not really. They woke Keller and doused the fire. In the darkness, they could hear the riders circling the ravine, looking for a way down. Smart men would wait until dawn. These men weren't smart. The first one came down the east slope, silhouetted against the stars. Cole shot him out of the saddle. The body hit the ravine floor hard, and suddenly the night erupted. Gunfire came from 3 directions. Evan returned fire blindly, aiming at muzzle flashes. Beside him, Cole was methodical. Pick a target, squeeze, move. No wasted motion, no panic. A bullet sparked off the rock inches from Evan's head. He felt stone fragments cut his cheek, tasted blood and dust. Another rider came charging down the slope, firing wildly. Evan shot him twice. The man fell sideways off his horse and didn't move. Keller, Cole shouted. Stay down! But Keller wasn't down. He was running, scrambling up the west slope in blind panic. A rifle cracked, and Keller stumbled, grabbed his leg, kept climbing. Damn it! Evan broke cover, running after him. More gunfire. A bullet tugged at Evan's coat. Another took his hat clean off. He reached Keller just as the land broker topped the ravine edge, grabbed him, started dragging him back down. That's when he saw the rider coming from the north. Big man on a bigger horse, rifle raised. Evan tried to bring his gun up, but knew he was too slow, too exposed, too... Cole's shot took the rider in the chest. The man toppled backward, and his horse bolted into the darkness. Evan hauled Keller back to cover. The land broker's leg was bleeding badly. The bullet had gone through his thigh. He was gasping, crying, useless. How many left? Evan asked. 3, Cole said. But they're pulling back. He was right. The gunfire had stopped. Evan could hear horses retreating, moving fast. Within minutes, the night was silent again except for Keller's whimpering. "Why'd they run?" Evan asked. "Because they got hurt worse than they expected," Cole said, "and because whoever sent them probably said to bring us back alive. Dead men can't tell you where they hid documents." They stayed in the ravine until dawn, taking turns keeping watch while Keller moaned and bled. When light finally came, they found 4 bodies and no horses except their own. Evan checked the dead men's pockets, found Dennison Company scrip and a letter. He read it by the growing light, then handed it to Cole. "It's from Crosswell," Evan said, "offering $500 for us, $1,000 if we're alive." Cole crumpled the letter. "He's getting desperate. We're patient. We're 3 days from Junction City. That's 3 more chances for him to stop us." They bound Keller's leg as best they could and kept moving. The land broker was feverish now, talking about deals he'd made and families he'd displaced. The guilt was coming out in delirium, and it painted a picture uglier than even the documents suggested. "There was a woman in Colorado," Keller mumbled as they rode. "Had 3 kids. Husband died in a mining accident. Crosswell wanted her land for a rail depot. She wouldn't sell, so he had someone accuse her of theft. Sheriff arrested her. Kids went to an orphanage. Land went to auction. Crosswell bought it for $20. Evan felt sick. "What happened to the woman?" "Hanged," Keller said. "Judge said she stole a horse. Probably did, trying to run. Doesn't matter. Dead is dead." "How many others?" Cole asked, voice flat. "I don't know. Dozens? I stopped keeping track after the first year. It was just business." Keller's eyes found focus. "You have to understand. I didn't pull any triggers. I didn't burn any barns. I just processed papers." "And cashed checks," Evan said. "And cashed checks," Keller admitted. "But I'm helping now. That has to count." "Ask the woman with 3 kids if it counts," Cole said. They rode on. The sun beat down. Keller's fever got worse, and behind them, always behind them, Evan could feel the pursuit like a weight. Junction City appeared on the horizon near sunset on the 3rd day. They'd made it. Against odds that should have been impossible, they'd actually made it. Marshal Thomas Brennan's office was on the east side of town, a squat brick building that looked like it could survive a siege. Cole walked in first, his hand near his gun, ready for betrayal. The marshal was exactly what Evan expected, weathered, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away. He took one look at Cole and stood up. "Ardan, heard you were dead." "Not yet," Cole said. "I need to report multiple murders across 3 territories and a land fraud operation that goes back at least 4 years. Brennan's eyes shifted to Evan and the bleeding, half-conscious Keller. "This official or personal?" "Does it matter?" "Might, when it comes to jurisdiction and paperwork." But Brennan was already pulling out forms. "Talk." Cole talked. Evan filled in gaps. Keller, when he was coherent, provided names and dates. The documents spoke for themselves, page after page of theft disguised as business, murder disguised as misfortune. When they finished, Brennan sat back and lit a cigarette. "Victor Crosswell," he said. "Hell, that's a big fish." "Can you catch him?" Cole asked. "With this evidence?" "Maybe. Probably. Federal prosecutors will jump at something this clean." Brennan looked at Keller. "You willing to testify?" Keller nodded weakly. "Then I'll wire the U.S. Attorney's office in Kansas City, get arrest warrants issued. But it'll take time, week, maybe 2. "Crosswell will run," Evan said. "Let him run. We'll catch him eventually. Men like that can't help but rebuild, and when they do, we'll be waiting." Brennan stood. "I'll get your friend to a doctor. You 2 should lay low. If Crosswell's got the resources I think he does, he'll keep coming." They left Keller in Brennan's custody and walked out into the fading light. For the first time in days, Evan felt like he could breathe. "We did it," he said. "We started it," Cole corrected. "This is just the beginning. Crosswell's not the only one running operations like this. He's just the one we caught." "So what now?" Cole looked at him. "Now you decide who you want to be. You wore my name for all the wrong reasons. Time to figure out what name you want to wear for the right ones." Before Evan could answer, he saw the kid. Luke Hale stood across the street, partially hidden by a water trough. He had a rifle slung across his back and eyes that were too old for his face. That's Hale's boy, Evan said quietly. Cole followed his gaze. The orphan from Harlan's Creek. He's been following us. I didn't realize until now, but he's been following us this whole time. The boy didn't run when they looked at him, didn't hide, just stood there with something that looked like patience or maybe just inevitability. Cole sighed. Go talk to him. He's your consequence. Evan crossed the street slowly, giving Luke plenty of time to run if he wanted to. The boy didn't move, just watched him approach with eyes that held enough pain to drown in. You shouldn't be here, Evan said. Neither should you, Luke replied. His voice had the crack of someone caught between childhood and whatever came after. You killed my father. I killed the men who killed your father. You brought them there. You wore that name. You started all of this. Evan couldn't argue with that. He'd spent 3 days trying to outrun his guilt, and here it was, 12 years old and carrying a rifle. You gonna shoot me? Evan asked. Luke's hand went to the rifle, then stopped. I should. That's what men do out here, right? Someone kills your family, you kill them back. That's what the stories say. But you're still breathing, and the men who actually pulled the trigger on my father are dead. And I keep thinking, Luke's voice broke. I keep thinking that killing you won't bring him back, won't make me less alone, won't fix anything. It won't, Evan said, but that doesn't make the wanting go away. So what do I do with it, the wanting? Evan looked at this kid who'd lost everything and was still looking for answers that probably didn't exist. I don't know, but shooting me won't tell you. They stood there in the fading light, killer and orphan, both trying to figure out what came next when there was no clear path forward. Finally, Luke lowered his hand from the rifle. I'm going to find the man who paid you, Crosswell. I'm going to make sure he pays for what he started. The law is going to handle that. The law didn't save my father. Luke turned to leave, then stopped. What's your real name? I should know the name of the man who destroyed my life. Evan Holt. Luke nodded slowly, like he was filing it away for later. Then he walked into the gathering dark, a boy with too much weight and not enough years, and Evan watched him go with the sick certainty that their paths would cross again. When Evan returned to Cole, the older gunfighter was leaning against a post, looking tired. He let you live, Cole observed. For now. Smart kid, stupid, but smart. He'll survive or he won't. Either way, it's not your choice anymore. They found a boarding house and paid for rooms with the last of Crosswell's gold. There was a bitter irony in that. Evan lay awake listening to the town settle into sleep, thinking about names and consequences and the way a single bad choice could branch out into 1,000 smaller tragedies. Somewhere in Kansas City, Victor Crosswell was probably sleeping soundly, still believing that money and connections could outrun justice. Somewhere in the darkness, Luke Hale was learning to hate with the kind of purity that only comes from grief. And somewhere between who he'd been and who he might become, Evan Holt was finally starting to understand that redemption wasn't a destination you reached. It was just the slow, grinding work of choosing better every single day for the rest of your life. The morning would bring new problems. The law would move slowly. Crosswell would fight back. And the legend of Cole Ardan would keep growing, fed by stories that got further from truth with each telling. But for now, in this moment, the documents were safe. The testimony was recorded, and the first crack in Crosswell's empire had been opened wide enough to see the rot beneath. It would have to be enough. The wire from Kansas City arrived 3 days later, delivered by a telegraph operator who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marshal Brennan read it twice, then looked up at Cole and Evan with an expression that managed to be both satisfied and grim. Federal prosecutor is moving forward, Brennan said. Arrest warrant for Victor Crosswell will be issued within 48 hours. They're also looking at accessory charges for anyone who facilitated the land grabs. That's good news, Evan said. It's complicated news, Brennan corrected. Word's already leaked. Crosswell knows we're coming. He's got lawyers scrambling and probably half his assets already moving offshore. He tapped the telegram. There's more. 2 federal agents were found dead outside Topeka yesterday. Shot execution style. Someone's cleaning house. Cole's jaw tightened. Crosswell's tying up loose ends. That'd be my guess. Anyone who can testify against him is now a target. Brennan looked at Evan. That includes you. Keller too? Keller's in protective custody here. I've got 3 deputies on him round the clock, but you two are exposed. If I were Crosswell, I'd put a bounty on you high enough that every gun for hire between here and California would come running. So we disappear, Evan said. You run, you mean? Cole shook his head. Running just changes the location of the fight. Doesn't end it. What's your alternative? Stand in the middle of the street and wait for someone to collect? Something like that. Cole stood, grabbing his hat. But we pick the street, and we make sure we see them coming. Brennan sighed. I can't officially sanction what you're planning. I'm not asking for official anything, Cole said. I'm asking you to keep Keller alive long enough to testify. We'll handle the rest. They left the marshal's office and walked into a town that suddenly felt smaller. Every face on the street was a potential threat. Every shadow held someone who might be reaching for a gun. Evan had lived with danger before, had courted it even. But this was different. This was being hunted by an organization with resources and reach that made simple survival feel like luck instead of skill. Where do we go? Evan asked. Back to Harlan's Creek, Cole said. That's insane. That's exactly where they'll look. Exactly. Which means we control the terrain. We know the town. We know who's friendly and who's not. And more importantly, it sends a message. What message? Cole's smile was cold. That we're not running. That if Crosswell wants us, he can come get us himself or send his best. Either way, we'll be waiting. They bought supplies and ammunition. Lots of ammunition. The general store clerk raised an eyebrow at the quantity but didn't ask questions. Questions got people killed in towns where men like Cole Ardan shopped. They were loading their saddlebags when Evan heard the voice. Leaving so soon? He turned. Luke Hale stood in the alley beside the store, still carrying that rifle, still wearing that expression of someone who'd aged a decade in a week. You following us? Evan asked. I'm following the story, Luke said. Heard the marshal talking about Crosswell, about how the law is finally going to do something. His voice dripped skepticism. You believe that? I believe they'll try, Cole said, studying the boy. Whether they succeed is another question. My father believed in the law, believed if he just worked hard and played fair, the system would protect him. Luke's hand drifted to his rifle. Didn't work out so well. So you're planning to do what? Kill Crosswell yourself? If I have to. Cole shook his head. Kid, I've killed men who deserved it and men who didn't. I've walked both sides of the law and learned there's not as much difference as people think. But I'm telling you now, revenge doesn't end the way you think it does. Then how does it end? With you becoming the thing you hate, or with you dead? Sometimes both. Luke's eyes narrowed. You're one to talk. You've built a whole life on violence. And look how well it's worked out for me, Cole said. I'm 43 years old. I've got a price on my head in 4 territories. I've got no home, no family, and a reputation that makes decent people cross the street when they see me coming. That what you want for yourself? I want my father back. Can't have that. So you need to decide what you want that's actually possible. The boy looked at Evan. What about you? You wore his name. You brought death to my town. What do you want? Evan had been asking himself that same question for days. I want to fix what I broke. Probably can't, but I can at least make sure the men who paid me to break it don't get away clean. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're going back to Harlan's Creek. How'd you know that? Because that's where it started. That's where it has to end. The boy shouldered his rifle. I'm coming with you. No, Cole said flatly. You can't stop me. I'll follow you anyway. Then I'll tie you up and leave you with the marshal. Try it. See how that works out. Evan could see the standoff forming. 2 stubborn people with nothing to lose and no interest in backing down. He stepped between them. Let him come, Evan said. Cole turned on him. He's a child. He's 12. I was working my father's farm at 10. You were probably shooting by 8. Age doesn't mean much out here. Evan looked at Luke. But if you come, you follow orders. Both of ours. No heroics. No revenge plays. You do exactly what we say when we say it. Agreed? Luke nodded. Say it. I agree. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his face shifted. Maybe he saw himself in this kid. Maybe he just recognized that some fights weren't worth having. Fine, Cole said. But first sign you can't handle it. You're done. I won't have a child's death on my conscience. You'll have plenty of others, Luke said. That's why I've got room for priorities. They rode out that afternoon, 3 people bound by violence and guilt, and the faint hope that facing the thing they'd started might somehow make it stop. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, indifferent to their struggles, and somewhere ahead Harlan's Creek waited like a grave that hadn't been filled yet. The town looked different when they arrived 2 days later. Smaller, maybe, or just more fragile. The main street was quieter than Evan remembered, like the place itself was holding its breath. They hitched their horses outside the saloon, the same saloon where Evan had first performed being Cole Ardan, where he'd threatened Robert Hale with words that turned into bullets. Walking back inside felt like stepping into his own ghost. Pete the bartender looked up when they entered. His eyes went wide. "You've got some nerve," Pete said. "I've got a lot of things," Cole replied. "Most of them bad. We need a place to stay, somewhere we can see both doors and have our backs to a wall. I've got a room upstairs, back corner. Windows overlook the street." Pete poured 3 whiskeys without being asked. "Why are you back here?" "To finish something. Denison men came through yesterday, said anyone who helps you will be considered part of the problem." "And what'd you tell them?" Pete set the glasses down hard. "I told them my establishment serves anyone who pays. Then I reminded them that the last time they tried to intimidate my customers, 3 of them ended up dead." He looked at Evan. "You do that?" "I did." "Good. They had it coming." Pete wiped down the bar. "Room's yours, $2 a night. You break anything, you buy it." They took the room and set up watch. Cole positioned himself by the window with a clear view of the street. Evan took the door. Luke sat on the bed, cleaning his rifle with the focus of someone who'd learned that survival meant preparation. "How long do we wait?" Evan asked. "However long it takes," Cole said. "Crosswell knows we're here by now. He'll send people. Question is how many and how smart." The answer came at midnight. Evan was on watch when he heard the horses. Not the casual clip-clop of someone passing through, the deliberate, coordinated movement of men who'd done this before. He shook Cole awake silently. The older gunfighter was alert instantly, gun already in hand. "How many?" Cole whispered. 6. Maybe 7. "Where?" "Surrounding the building." Cole moved to the window and looked out carefully. "More than 7. I count at least 10. They're not even trying to hide." "That's not good." "That's confident. They think the numbers are enough." Cole checked his ammunition. "They're about to learn otherwise." Luke was awake now, holding his rifle with white knuckles. "What do I do?" "Stay low. Cover the door. Anything comes through that isn't us, you shoot it." Cole looked at Evan. "You ready for this?" "No." "Good. The minute you think you're ready for a gunfight is the minute you get killed in one." The first shot came through the window, shattering glass and burying itself in the far wall. Cole returned fire immediately, his shot precise and deadly. Someone screamed in the street below. Then it was chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The walls of the room splintered as bullets punched through old wood. Evan fired at muzzle flashes, trying to pick targets in the darkness. Beside him, Cole worked methodically. Aim, fire, shift position, repeat. The man fought like he'd done this 1,000 times, because he probably had. Luke's rifle cracked from the doorway. "They're coming up the stairs!" Evan spun just as the first man reached the landing. He shot without thinking, pure instinct. The man fell backward, taking 2 others down with him. More were coming. "Reload!" Cole shouted, still firing out the window. Evan's hand shook as he thumbed cartridges into his revolver. This wasn't like the ravine. This wasn't a running fight with room to maneuver. This was a box with killers on all sides and no way out except through. Another man appeared in the doorway. Luke shot him in the chest. The kid's face was pale but steady, and Evan felt a flicker of something that might have been pride or might have been horror that a 12-year-old was this calm about killing. "We can't hold this position," Evan said. "We don't have to hold it forever." Cole shot twice more. "Just long enough." "For what?" "For them to realize it's costing more than it's worth." But the attackers weren't backing down. If anything, they were pressing harder. Someone threw something through the window, a bottle with a burning rag stuffed in the top. Cole kicked it back out before it could spread, but the message was clear. They were willing to burn the whole building down. "Back door!" Evan grabbed Luke. "Now!" They ran, Cole covering their retreat with steady fire. The back stairs were narrow and dark and smelled like old beer. They burst out into the alley just as more gunmen rounded the corner. Evan fired first, Cole fired second. 2 men went down. A third dove behind a barrel, and Luke put a bullet through the wood that made the man reconsider his cover. They ran for the horses, bullets chasing them through the darkness. Evan felt something hot graze his shoulder, close enough to hurt, not close enough to stop him. They reached the animals and swung up, riding hard out of town with gunfire crackling behind them. A mile out, Cole pulled up short. "Count off." "I'm here," Evan said, breathing hard. "Me too," Luke added. "Good." Cole turned in his saddle, looking back at Harlan's Creek. The saloon was burning now, flames licking up into the night sky. "We just cost Pete his business." "He said we'd have to pay for anything we broke," Evan said. "Don't think we've got enough for this." They rode to the abandoned grain storage, the safe house they'd used before. It felt smaller now, more exposed. Inside by lamplight, they took stock. Evan's shoulder was bleeding, but not badly. Luke was unharmed. Cole had taken a bullet to his side, the same side he'd been wounded in Topeka. The injury was bleeding through his shirt. "How bad?" Evan asked. "Bad enough." Cole sat down heavily. "But I've had worse." Evan tore up a spare shirt and bound the wound as best he could. The older gunfighter didn't make a sound, just stared at the wall with eyes that had seen this particular scenario play out too many times. "That was at least 15 men," Luke said. "Maybe more." "Crosswell's not playing anymore," Cole said. "He's gone from trying to scare us off to trying to erase us." "So what do? We make him come to us. All the way. No more intermediaries, no more hired guns." Cole looked at Evan. "Think you can get a message to him?" "What kind of message?" "The kind that makes him angry enough to do something stupid." Evan thought about it. "I know people in Kansas City, from before, people who can get word to Crosswell's office. Tell him we've got more documents. Tell him Keller wasn't the only one keeping records. Tell him if he wants them back, he needs to come himself. He won't fall for that. He will if we make him think those documents include his financial backers, the men who funded this whole operation, the names Keller didn't have." Cole's smile was sharp. "Rich men hate exposure worse than they hate death. Threaten their money, they'll do anything. Including send an army. We don't need him to send an army. We need him to come personally. Crosswell's smart, but he's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. We make him think his partners are about to abandon him. He'll scramble to control the situation himself." Luke spoke up. "And when he comes?" "When he comes," Cole said, "we end this." They spent the next day preparing. Evan rode to the nearest telegraph office and sent the message exactly as Cole had dictated. Luke kept watch from the storage building's upper window, and Cole, wounded and exhausted, cleaned weapons and checked ammunition with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew that details saved lives. The reply came faster than expected. Evan returned with a telegram that simply read, "Kansas City, 3 days. Come alone or the boy dies." Cole read it and laughed. "He thinks he still has leverage." "He knows about Luke," Evan said. "How?" "Same way he knew to hit us at the saloon. He's got informants. Probably someone in Junction City who saw us with the kid." Cole crumpled the telegram. "Doesn't matter. Changes nothing. It changes everything. He's threatening Luke." "He's bluffing. He doesn't have Luke. We do, and we're not going to Kansas City." "Then where?" Cole walked to the window, looking out at the endless prairie. "There's an old relay station about 20 miles north. Been abandoned for years. One building, clear sight lines in all directions, one way in and one way out. We tell Crosswell that's where we'll meet him, where we'll exchange the documents for safe passage. He'll bring an army. Let him. The relay station has thick walls and limited approaches. We can hold it against 20 men if we're smart." "And if he brings 30? Cole looked at him. "Then we'd better be very smart." They sent the counteroffer and got confirmation 6 hours later. Crosswell had agreed to the meet. 3 days. The relay station. He'd come personally to collect the documents. Those 3 days passed like years. They moved to the relay station and fortified it as best they could. Barricaded windows, reinforced doors, set up firing positions with overlapping fields of view. Luke proved surprisingly useful. The kid had a good eye for defensive positions and wasn't afraid to work. On the second day, while they were reinforcing the north wall, Luke spoke up. "Why are you doing this?" Cole looked at him. "Doing what?" "All of it. You could have killed Evan and walked away. Could have left me in Junction City. Could have let the law handle Crosswell. But you're here, building fortifications and preparing to fight a battle you might not win. Why?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the worst thing about a reputation is?" "What?" "It stops being about what you did and starts being about what people think you'll do. Cole Ardan, the legend, is fearless, unstoppable, perfect. Cole Ardan, the man, is tired, scarred, and makes mistakes. But the legend won't let the man rest. He drove another nail into the barricade. Maybe I'm doing this because it's the right thing, or maybe I'm doing it because the legend demands it. Either way, the work's the same." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." Luke turned to Evan. "What about you?" "I'm here because I broke something and I'm trying to fix it. Whether that's possible or not, I won't know until I try." "And if we all die?" Evan smiled without humor. "Then at least we'll die trying. That's got to count for something." The kid nodded slowly, like he was filing away wisdom he'd need later. Then he went back to work, and they finished the fortifications in silence. The third day dawned clear and cold. They were ready as they'd ever be. Ammunition stacked, positions assigned, escape route planned if things went completely wrong. Crosswell arrived at noon. He came with 20 men. Evan counted them from the relay station's upper window. They rode in formation, military precise, wearing Denison colors and carrying enough firepower to level a small town. And in the center of them, riding a black horse that probably cost more than most men made in a year, was Victor Crosswell himself. He looked exactly like Evan remembered. Soft hands, expensive clothes, the kind of face that smiled while signing your death warrant. Crosswell stopped 50 yards from the station and dismounted. He walked forward alone, hands visible and empty. "Ardan," he called out. "I'm here as agreed. Let's talk like civilized men." Cole stepped out onto the relay station's porch. Evan stayed inside, rifle trained on Crosswell's chest. Luke covered the door. "You brought an army," Cole said. "Insurance," Crosswell replied. "Can you blame me? You've killed quite a few of my men." "Your men killed innocent families." Semantics. What matters is we're here now. You have something I want. I have something you want. Let's make a trade. "I want you in a federal prison." Crosswell smiled. "Not gonna happen. I've got lawyers that'll tie this up for years. Judges who owe me favors. Politicians on my payroll. By the time any charges stick, if they stick, I'll be dead of old age." He spread his hands. "But I'm willing to make this easy. Give me the documents. Walk away. I'll even throw in $10,000 for your trouble." "No." "No? Just like that?" "Just like that." Crosswell's smile faded. "You're making a mistake. I didn't want this to get ugly, but you're forcing my hand." "Your hand was forced the moment you started stealing land and killing families. Everything since then is just you trying to avoid consequences." "Consequences," Crosswell laughed. "You want to talk about consequences? Let me tell you how this ends. You give me those documents or my men burn that building down with you inside it. Your choice." Cole's hand drifted to his gun. "Third option. Your men try to burn us out. We kill half of them. The other half run. You die. And the documents go to the federal prosecutor anyway." "You're bluffing." "I'm really not." For a moment they stood there, two men separated by 50 yards in a gulf of choices that couldn't be uncrossed. Then Crosswell's expression hardened. "Kill them," he said. "All of them." The enforcers opened fire. Cole dove back into the relay station as bullets tore through the air where he'd been standing. Evan fired from the window, dropping the closest gunman. Luke's rifle cracked from the side room, and another enforcer went down. The battle was on. It was brutal and close, and nothing like the stories made violence out to be. There was no glory in it. No clean lines between good and evil, just noise and blood and the desperate mathematics of survival. Evan fired until his rifle was empty, switched to his pistol, fired until that was empty too. Reloaded with hands that shook from adrenaline and fear. Beside him, Cole worked with mechanical precision. Target, fire, target, fire. The man's face was blank, emotionless, and somehow that was more frightening than if he'd been angry. Luke held the side approach. his rifle speaking in steady intervals. The kid was calm, controlled, and Evan realized that Luke wasn't fighting out of fear anymore. He was fighting out of something colder, something that looked disturbingly like purpose. The enforcers tried to rush the building twice. Both times, concentrated fire drove them back, but they had numbers and ammunition and time. The defenders had walls and determination and the knowledge that surrender meant death. "We can't hold this forever," Evan shouted over the gunfire. "We don't have to." Cole shot an enforcer who'd gotten too close. "Just long enough." "You keep saying that. Long enough for what?" Cole's answer was cut off by an explosion. Something heavy had hit the relay station's east wall, not a bullet, something bigger. "They've got dynamite," Luke yelled. Another explosion. The building shook. Dust rained down from the rafters. "Out!" Cole grabbed Evan. "Back door, now!" They ran through smoke and chaos, Cole in the lead, Evan pulling Luke behind him. The back door burst open under Cole's shoulder and they stumbled into daylight and gunfire. 3 enforcers were waiting. Cole shot 2 before they could react. The third got a shot off that went wide. Evan shot him twice, and the man fell. They ran for the horses, but more enforcers were coming around the building. There were too many. Even Cole couldn't shoot fast enough. That's when Evan heard the new sound. Not gunfire. Horses. A lot of them. He looked up and saw riders coming from the south. 20 of them. Maybe more. For a heartbeat, he thought it was more of Crosswell's men. Then he saw the badges. Marshal Brennan rode at the head of a federal posse, and his rifle was already firing. The enforcers scattered, caught between 2 forces. Some tried to surrender, most tried to run. None of them made it far. The battle ended as abruptly as it started. One moment there was gunfire and screaming, the next there was just silence and smoke and bodies in the dirt. Brennan dismounted, walking over to where Cole stood bleeding from at least 3 new wounds. "You're late," Cole said. Federal prosecutor wanted to observe the arrest personally. Turns out he's not much of a rider. Brennan looked at the carnage. "You couldn't have waited?" Crosswell wasn't in a waiting mood. "Where is he?" They found Victor Crosswell trying to crawl away from the relay station, his expensive clothes torn and bloody. Cole walked over and stood above him, gun pointed down. "It's over," Cole said. Crosswell looked up with eyes full of hatred and fear. "You have no idea what you've done. I have partners, powerful men. They'll come after you, after everyone you care about. Let them come. I'll be waiting." Brennan stepped in, putting a hand on Cole's arm. "He's mine now. Federal custody. He'll stand trial. He'll buy his way out. Maybe, but at least he'll have to try. That's more than most men like him ever face." Brennan gestured to his deputies. "Take him, and someone get a doctor for the wounded." Cole lowered his gun, and Evan saw something in the man's face that looked like exhaustion. Not physical, though there was plenty of that. This was deeper. The exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for so long they'd forgotten what peace felt like. Luke appeared beside them, still holding his rifle. The kid's face was spattered with dust and powder burns, but his eyes were clear. "Is it finished?" Luke asked. "For now," Cole said. "Until the next one." "There's always a next one?" "Out here?" "Usually." Brennan organized his men, collecting the dead and wounded, securing the prisoners. Evan watched it all happen with a strange sense of disconnection, like he was observing someone else's life. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd actually won. Crosswell was in custody. The documents were safe. The federal case would proceed. So why did it feel so hollow? Because 3 men were still dead in Harlan's Creek. Because Luke was still an orphan. Because Evan had still worn another man's name and brought death to a town that didn't deserve it. Victory didn't undo any of that. It just meant the dying was over. For now. Cole sat down on what was left of the relay station's porch and let a federal doctor examine his wounds. Evan joined him, and they sat in silence while chaos organized itself around them. "Thank you," Evan said finally. "For what?" "For not killing me when you had the chance. For giving me a way to make this right. Or at least less wrong." Cole looked at him with tired eyes. "You think this made it right?" "No, but it's better than doing nothing." "Maybe." Cole winced as the doctor probed a wound. "Or maybe we just traded one set of problems for another. Crosswell's partners are still out there. His operation is bigger than one man. We cut off a head, but the body's still alive." So what do? We keep fighting, or we walk away and let someone else fight. Either way, the war doesn't end. It just changes location. Luke sat down on Cole's other side, setting his rifle aside carefully. My father used to say that evil only wins when good men do nothing. Your father was right, Cole said. But what he might not have told you is that doing something doesn't guarantee winning. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. Sometimes you win, but the cost is so high you wish you'd lost. Then why fight at all? Because the alternative is worse. They sat there as the sun started to set, 3 people bound by violence and circumstance, watching federal marshals clean up a battle that solved some problems and created others. Behind them, the relay station smoldered. Around them, the prairie stretched endlessly, indifferent to human struggle. And somewhere in the distance, in cities and towns they'd never see, other men like Crosswell were making plans that would hurt people they'd never meet. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But for today, in this moment, they'd won. And that would have to be enough. Brennan's office in Junction City became a war room over the next week. Maps covered the walls, marked with pins showing every town where Crosswell's network had operated. Red for confirmed land grabs, blue for suspected, yellow for murders that looked like accidents but probably weren't. By the time they finished plotting, the map looked like someone had spilled paint across 3 territories. 160 families, Brennan said, standing back to survey the damage. That's the conservative estimate. Could be twice that if we count the ones who took the buyout before things got violent. The federal prosecutor, a thin man named Marcus Webb, who looked like he survived on coffee and fury, studied the documents Keller had provided. He'd been reading for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, making notes in margins with handwriting that got progressively worse as exhaustion set in. The good news, Webb said without looking up, is we have enough to charge Crosswell with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder in at least 40 cases. What's the bad news? Cole asked. He was sitting in the corner, arm in a sling from the relay station fight, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. The bad news is that Crosswell's just the visible piece. These documents reference shell companies, silent partners, and financial backers that go up the chain to people with real power. Senators, railroad executives, territorial governors. Webb finally looked up, and his eyes were bloodshot but sharp. We cut down Crosswell. We're going to make enemies who can actually fight back. So we don't do it? Evan said. He was leaning against the wall, still wearing the same clothes from the fight, too tired to care about appearances. So we do it smart, Webb corrected. We build the case piece by piece. Start with Crosswell and the men who pulled triggers. Get convictions there, then work our way up the chain. It'll take years, maybe decades. But it's the only way to make sure it sticks. Luke spoke up from where he sat by the window, still keeping watch like the habit had become part of him. What happens to the families, the ones who lost their land? That's complicated, Webb said. Some of the sales were technically legal, even if the intimidation wasn't. Unwinding those contracts will require individual lawsuits. Could take forever. So they just lose everything? I didn't say that. I said it's complicated. Webb pulled out another stack of papers. But there's a provision in territorial law. If we can prove the sales were made under duress, they can be invalidated. Property returned to original owners or their heirs. Like Luke, Evan said quietly. Like Luke, Webb confirmed. The Hale homestead should revert to him once Crosswell's conviction is final. Same for the other families in Harlan's Creek and beyond. Luke didn't say anything, just stared out the window at a town he didn't know, thinking about land he'd inherited through violence. Keller was brought in that afternoon, still limping from the leg wound, still looking like a man who'd made a deal with something he didn't fully understand. He sat across from Webb and answered questions for 6 hours straight, providing names, dates, dollar amounts. Every answer another nail in Crosswell's coffin. When they finally let him rest, Keller looked at Evan with eyes that carried too much weight. Does it matter? Keller asked. What I'm doing now, does it balance out what I did before? No, Evan said, because lying seemed cruel. But it's better than nothing. That's not much comfort. It's all I've got. Keller nodded slowly and was led back to his cell. He'd testify when the trial started, perform his role in the legal theater, and probably disappear into witness protection somewhere flat and forgettable. A man who'd profited from other people's suffering would get to live out his days in peace while the people he'd helped destroy stayed buried. The system was working exactly as designed, which was the problem. The first arrest came 3 days later. A land broker in Colorado named Samuel Pine, who'd facilitated 7 forced sales and pocketed commissions on all of them. Federal marshals picked him up at his office, and he went quietly, probably already calculating bail and lawyer fees. Then a surveyor in New Mexico. Then 2 more brokers in Wyoming. Then a lawyer in Denver who'd drafted the contracts that made theft look legal. Webb worked through the list methodically, building his case 1 arrest at a time. Each one sent ripples through the network, panicked telegrams, sudden disappearances, frantic attempts to destroy records. The people who'd thought themselves untouchable were learning that height just meant a longer fall. But the real targets, the senators, the railroad executives, the territorial governors, they stayed protected. Webb couldn't touch them yet. The evidence was circumstantial, the connections too indirect, the power differential too vast. "It's not enough," Cole said one night, sitting in Brennan's office after everyone else had gone home. "You're cutting branches. The roots are still intact." "I know," Webb admitted. He looked exhausted, running on nothing but determination and bad coffee. "But this is how the law works. We can't just execute everyone we think is guilty. We have to prove it, and proving it takes time. Time the victims don't have." "No, they don't." Webb leaned back in his chair. "You think I like this? You think I enjoy knowing that the men who really orchestrated all of this are going to walk away clean while some mid-level functionary takes the fall? Then do something about it." "I am. This is what I can do within the law. If you want something else, that's your department." Cole smiled without humor. "Careful, prosecutor. That sounded like you're encouraging vigilante justice." "I'm not encouraging anything. I'm just acknowledging that there are limits to what the law can accomplish." Webb stood, grabbing his coat. "Do what you need to do, Ardan. Just don't tell me about it afterward." He left, and Cole sat alone in the office, staring at the map with all its pins and all its evidence of systematic cruelty. Evan found him there an hour later. "You planning something?" Evan said. "Not a question." "I'm thinking about it." "Webb's right. We can't just kill everyone connected to this." "Can't we?" Cole looked at him. "How many people died because of Crosswell's operation? 50? 100? How many more will die in the next operation, run by the next man like him because we didn't finish what we started? So we become executioners. We already are. Just slower about it." Cole stood, stretching out stiffness. "But you're right. Killing them won't fix the system. It'll just make us feel better temporarily." "Then what's the alternative?" "We make them destroy themselves. We take what Webb can't use in court and leak it to newspapers. We turn their partners against each other. We make them fight over scraps while the law works its slow magic." Cole grabbed his hat. "We don't have to kill the roots. We just have to make sure they can't grow anything." They started that night. Cole had connections, people who owed him favors, people who traded in information, people who lived in the spaces between legal and not. He called in debts from Denver to Santa Fe, from Dodge City to Tucson. Within a week, newspapers across 3 territories were running stories. Not the full story, that would have been too easy to dismiss, but pieces. A railroad executive's secret partnership with a convicted fraudster, a senator's brother on the board of a shell company, a territorial governor's suspicious land purchases in areas where families had recently been displaced. Each story was small enough to be plausible. Together, they painted a picture. The backlash was immediate. Political opponents seized on the scandals. Reform candidates started winning elections. Investors pulled funding from projects connected to anyone in Crosswell's network. The powerful men who thought themselves safe found themselves fighting fires on multiple fronts. "It's working," Brennan said, reading through the latest newspaper reports. 3 senators are under investigation. 2 railroad executives resigned. That territorial governor in New Mexico is facing impeachment. "Working isn't the same as finished," Cole said. "Nothing ever is with you, is it? Not when the job's half done." But the system was cracking. Slowly, imperfectly, but cracking nonetheless. And in that chaos, something else happened that none of them expected. The families started coming back. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But some. The ones who'd taken the buyout before the violence started, who'd moved to cities or different territories. who tried to build new lives and found they couldn't let go of the old ones. They came back to Harlan's Creek first, then to other towns. Came back to land that was legally theirs again, thanks to Webb's legal maneuvering and territorial rulings. Came back to rebuild what had been stolen. Luke was with Evan and Cole when the first family arrived, a woman named Sarah Chen with 2 teenage sons. She stood in front of the ruins of what had been her home and just stared. "They burned it," she said quietly. "Told us it was an accident, that we'd already sold it anyway, so what did it matter?" "It matters," Luke said. He'd been quiet since the relay station fight, processing things in whatever way 12-year-olds process violence and grief. "It all matters." Sarah looked at him. "You're Robert Hale's boy." "Yes, ma'am. I heard what happened to your father. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about your home." They stood there, 2 people connected by loss and land, and something passed between them that looked almost like understanding. Sarah's sons started clearing debris that afternoon. By evening, other families had arrived, some with wagons full of supplies, some with just what they could carry. They didn't have much, but they had the land again, and out here that was everything. Harlan's Creek started to rebuild. Not quickly, not easily, but rebuild nonetheless. Someone raised a new frame for Pete's saloon. He'd survived the fire by pure luck and returned with insurance money and stubborn determination. Someone else started rebuilding the general store. Houses went up slowly, timber and sweat, and the kind of hope that comes after you've already lost everything once. Luke helped. Evan watched him work alongside families who'd lost as much as he had and saw something shift in the kid. The anger was still there, probably always would be, but it had company now. Purpose, maybe. Or just the recognition that destroying yourself didn't undo what was destroyed. "He's going to make it," Cole said, watching from a distance. "You sound surprised," Evan replied. "I am. Most kids who see what he saw don't come back from it. They either die young or become something hard and broken." Cole adjusted his sling. "But he's got something. Resilience, maybe. Or just stubbornness." "Sounds familiar." "Yeah, that's what worries me." They stayed in Harlan's Creek for 2 weeks, helping with the rebuild. Cole wasn't much use with one arm, but he could plan and supervise. Evan swung a hammer and hauled lumber and tried not to think about how different the town looked when people were moving towards something instead of running away. The trial started in Kansas City on a Tuesday in October. Victor Crosswell stood before a federal judge and pled not guilty to 47 counts of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. His lawyers, expensive, sharp, numerous, immediately filed motions to dismiss, to delay, to exclude evidence. Webb fought them on every point. The trial became a spectacle. Newspapers sent correspondents, crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Politicians made statements supporting whichever side their constituents demanded. Keller testified for 3 days. He laid out the operation in excruciating detail, how families were selected, how intimidation escalated, how sales were processed to look legitimate. The defense tried to break him on cross-examination, but he'd been broken long before he took the stand. He had nothing left to lose by telling the truth. Other witnesses followed, survivors from displaced families, federal agents who'd investigated the shell companies, handwriting experts who verified Crosswell's signatures on incriminating documents. The defense argued that Crosswell was a businessman who'd trusted the wrong people, that he'd been defrauded by his own employees, that there was no direct evidence he'd ordered violence against anyone. It was technically true. Crosswell had been careful. He'd insulated himself with layers of plausible deniability. But juries aren't stupid, and this jury had heard 3 weeks of testimony that painted a clear picture of systematic cruelty. They deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The telegram reached Harlan's Creek that evening. Evan read it aloud to the families gathered in what would eventually be Pete's new saloon, for now just a roof and 3 walls and a temporary bar made from sawhorses and planks. Victor Crosswell has been found guilty of 47 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to murder. Sentencing is scheduled for next month, but prosecutors are asking for 20 years minimum in federal prison. Someone cheered, others joined in. Sarah Chen just closed her eyes and breathed like she'd been holding her breath since the day they'd burned her home. Luke didn't cheer. He just nodded once, like something had been confirmed that he'd already known. Cole raised a glass. Water, since the saloon didn't have alcohol yet, and the room quieted. "This doesn't bring back the dead," Cole said. "Doesn't undo what was done. But it means something that the man who orchestrated it will answer for it. That has to count." They drank to that. To small victories and incomplete justice, and the grinding, imperfect machinery of law that sometimes, occasionally, worked the way it was supposed to. But the next morning brought news that complicated the celebration. 3 of Croswell's financial backers had fled the country. A senator connected to the operation had died under suspicious circumstances. Heart attack, the official report said, though the timing was convenient. 2 railroad executives had made deals with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against others in exchange for immunity. The system was cracking, but it was also protecting itself. Some people would face consequences. Others would walk away. And the fundamental structure that allowed men like Croswell to operate, the concentration of power, the corruption of institutions, the way money could buy almost anything, including justice, that would remain intact. "It's not enough," Luke said. They were standing at his father's grave, a simple wooden cross that would eventually be replaced with something more permanent. The boy had been coming here every day, and Evan had started joining him. Neither of them talked much during these visits. Words felt inadequate. "The conviction?" Evan asked. "All of it. Croswell goes to prison, but the men who funded him don't. Some families get their land back, but others don't. Pete gets insurance money, but my father's still dead." Luke's hand drifted to his rifle. He carried it everywhere now, like Cole carried his gun. "When does it actually end?" "Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the best we can do is make sure it's a little better than it was." "That's not good enough." "No," Evan agreed, "but it's all we've got." They stood in silence while wind moved through grass that was finally starting to reclaim land that had been fought over and bled on. Somewhere in the distance, someone was hammering, the sound of rebuilding, of people refusing to stay broken. Luke spoke again, quieter. "Are you leaving?" "Probably. Soon. This isn't my home." "Where will you go?" "Don't know yet. Somewhere that needs the kind of help I can provide." Evan looked at the boy. "What about you?" "I'll stay. This land is mine now. Someone has to work it." "You're 12. I'll be 13 in a month. Out here, that's old enough." Luke turned to face him. "Will I see you again?" "Maybe. Probably not. Men like me and Cole, we don't stay in one place long. We follow the trouble, or it follows us." "Is that what you want? To keep following trouble?" Evan thought about it. "I want to matter. To do something that makes a difference. Whether that means following trouble or running from it, I haven't figured out yet. When you do, let me know." They shook hands, a strange, formal gesture between a grown man carrying guilt and a child carrying grief. Then Luke walked back toward town, where families were building and life was slowly, painfully returning to something that resembled normal. Evan stayed at the grave a while longer. He'd never met Robert Hale, just threatened him, set in motion the events that killed him, and spent every day since trying to balance scales that couldn't be balanced. "I'm sorry," Evan said to the wooden cross and the silent earth beneath it. "For what that's worth." The wind was his only answer. Cole found him there an hour later. "We're leaving tomorrow," Cole said. "Marshal Brennan's got word about another operation. New Mexico. Different players, same pattern." "You going?" "Yeah, someone has to." Cole looked at the grave. "You don't have to come. You've done enough. More than enough, considering where you started." Evan thought about walking away. About finding some quiet town where nobody knew his name, real or borrowed, and starting over. Building something instead of tearing things down. Living a life that didn't revolve around violence and consequence. It was a nice thought. He let himself hold it for a moment before letting it go. "I'll come," Evan said. "You sure?" "No, but I'm coming anyway." Cole smiled. "That's the most honest thing you've said in weeks." They walked back to town together, 2 men who'd started as enemies and become something else. Not quite friends, but allies in a war that had no clear end. Behind them, Robert Hale's grave stood quiet in the afternoon sun. One marker among many in a fight that would outlive everyone who'd started it. That night, Evan packed his saddlebags and cleaned his guns, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end badly. Luke came by to say goodbye, and they didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. Sarah Chen brought food for the road, dried meat and hardtack and a kindness that Evan didn't feel like he'd earned. Pete, operating out of his temporary saloon, poured them drinks on the house. For killing the men who burned my business, Pete said. We didn't do that for you, Cole replied. Don't matter why you did it. Still did it. Pete raised his own glass. To messy justice and men stupid enough to chase it. They drank to that and to a dozen other toasts that got progressively less coherent as the night wore on. By the time Evan made it back to his boarding house room, he was tired and drunk and ready for tomorrow to already be over. But morning came anyway, bringing light and hangovers and the road that waited. They rode out at dawn, Cole and Evan, heading south toward new trouble and old patterns. Harlan's Creek faded behind them, a town healing slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. The system had cracked, not broken. That would take more than one conviction, more than one town rebuilt, but cracked enough to let light through. And in that light, families were reclaiming land, rebuilding homes, refusing to stay victims. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted, but it was the one they had, and that would have to be enough. For now. The New Mexico operation turned out to be smaller than they'd expected, but meaner. A cattle baron named Dutch Merrick had been running homesteaders off water rights, using drought and desperation as weapons instead of guns. Cheaper that way, and harder to prosecute. Cole and Evan spent 3 weeks documenting his methods, gathering evidence, and eventually watching federal marshals drag him away in chains. It felt anticlimactic. No gunfight, no dramatic confrontation, just paperwork and testimony and the slow grinding of justice. This is what winning looks like most of the time, Cole said as they watched Merrick's wagon disappear toward Santa Fe. Boring and unsatisfying. Better than losing, Evan replied. Is it? Sometimes I wonder. They drifted after that. Colorado for a month, chasing rumors of another land grab that turned out to be legitimate business. Wyoming for 2 weeks, helping a sheriff who'd gotten in over his head with claim jumpers. Always moving, always working, never quite settling into anything that looked like peace. Evan stopped counting the towns. They started blurring together, different names, same problems. Men with power taking from men without it. The law trying to keep up and mostly failing. And in the gaps between what the law could do and what needed doing, people like Cole found work. People like Evan had become. 6 months after laving Harlan's Creek, they got word that Crosswell had been sentenced. 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15. It was more than they'd expected, less than he deserved. The newspapers called it a landmark case. Prosecutors called it a warning to others. Cole called it incomplete. His partners are still out there, Cole said, reading the telegram in a hotel room in Cheyenne. The men who funded the whole operation, they're still walking around free, probably already starting new schemes under different names. Webb said it would take decades to bring them down. Webb's probably right, but decades is a long time to let them keep hurting people. Evan looked at him. Cole had aged in the past 6 months, not dramatically, but noticeably. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His movements had gotten slower, more careful. The relay station wounds had healed poorly, leaving him with a stiffness in his left side that he tried to hide and mostly failed. You thinking about going after them? Evan asked. I'm thinking about a lot of things. Cole set down the telegram. Including whether I've got another fight left in me. You're tired. I'm old. There's a difference, but it leads to the same place. Cole walked to the window, looking out at a town that could have been any town. I've been doing this for 25 years, Evan, wearing a gun, chasing bad men, trying to make things slightly less terrible. And you know what I've learned? What? That it never ends. You take down one Crosswell, another one appears. You save one town, 3 more need saving. The work is infinite, but the workers aren't. He turned from the window. I'm tired of being Cole Ardan. The legend, I mean. The name that makes men reach for guns and women pull their children inside. I'm ready for that to be done. So retire, find some quiet place, and live out your days in peace. Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it. Men like me don't retire. We just die slower or faster, depending on our luck. Then what are you saying? I'm saying I've got one more fight in me, one more job, and then I'm done. Whatever happens after that, happens. The job came 3 weeks later, delivered by a rider who'd tracked them across 2 territories. The message was simple. Victor Crosswell had information to trade. Names, locations, evidence on the men who'd bankrolled his operation. But he'd only deal with Cole Ardan directly, and only in person. It's a trap. Evan said immediately. Probably, Cole agreed. So we ignore it. Nor. Can't. If he actually has information on the financiers, we need it. Webb's been trying to build that case for months with nothing to show for it. Why would Crosswell help us? He's already convicted, already sentenced. Because men like that always think they can make one more deal. That if they give up the people above them, maybe they can reduce their sentence. Get transferred to a better prison. Something. Cole read the message again. Or maybe he just wants to see me before he disappears into the system for the rest of his life. Where does he want to meet? Kansas City Federal Prison. He's being held there pending transfer. Evan processed that. A prison meeting was safer than an ambush in some remote location. But safer didn't mean safe, and Crosswell had proven he had reach even from behind bars. I'm coming with you, Evan said. Figured you would. They reached Kansas City 4 days later, riding through a city that felt too big and too crowded after months on the frontier. Buildings pressed against each other like they were fighting for space. People moved with purpose Evan had forgotten existed. Always rushing somewhere, always late, always convinced their urgency mattered. The federal prison was a brick fortress on the city's edge, designed to hold men who'd committed crimes that crossed territorial lines. Crosswell was in a private cell, not luxury, but isolated from the general population for his own protection. Marshal Brennan met them at the gate. He'd come up from Junction City to oversee the meeting, partly as security, partly as witness to whatever deal might be offered. He's been asking for you specifically, Brennan told Cole. Won't talk to Webb, won't talk to federal investigators. Just keeps saying he'll only deal with Cole Ardan. What's Webb think? Evan asked. Webb thinks it's either legitimate intelligence or an elaborate revenge fantasy. Either way, he wants to hear it. Brennan led them through security checkpoints, each one more thorough than the last. You're not bringing weapons inside. Prison rules. Cole handed over his gun without complaint. Evan did the same, though it felt wrong being unarmed in a building full of violent men. They were led to a small room with a table and 3 chairs. One wall was barred, the other solid stone. A guard stood outside watching through the bars with the expression of someone who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Crosswell was brought in 10 minutes later. He'd changed since the trial. Lost weight, gained shadows under his eyes. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by prison clothes that didn't fit quite right. But his eyes still held that calculating intelligence, that sense of a man always running numbers in his head. Mr. Ardan, Crosswell said, sitting down. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, Cole said. You have information. I'm here to listen. That's the extent of our relationship. Fair enough. Crosswell folded his hands on the table. I assume you know about the men who funded my operation, the real power behind the land consolidation scheme. We know they exist. Webb's been trying to prove it for months. I can give you proof. Names, account numbers, correspondence, everything you need to bring charges against 7 men who collectively control more wealth and influence than most territorial governments. In exchange for what? Transfer to a minimum security facility, reduced sentence, and protection, witness protection, new identity, the works. When I testify against these men, they'll want me dead. I need assurances I'll survive long enough to see them convicted. Cole leaned back in his chair. Why now? You could have offered this during your trial. Could have used it for a plea deal. Because during my trial, I still thought I might beat the charges. Thought my lawyers could create enough reasonable doubt to walk. Crosswell's smile was bitter. I was wrong. And now I'm looking at 25 years in a place that will break me long before my sentence is up. So I'm cutting my losses. You're betraying your partners. I'm doing what they'd do if our positions were reversed. This is business, Mr. Ardan. Nothing personal. It was personal to the families you destroyed. Yes, it was. Crosswell met his eyes. You want me to apologize? Express remorse? I could, but we both know it would be performance. The truth is I made a bet on the wrong system and lost. Now I'm trying to minimize my losses. Evan spoke up. What guarantee do we have that your information is real? That this isn't just another scheme? None. You'll have to verify it, but I'm willing to give you enough details up front to prove I'm serious. Crosswell pulled a folded paper from his pocket. How he'd gotten it past security, Evan couldn't guess. This is a sample. Account numbers for 3 of the 7 financiers. Wire transfer records showing money flowing from their holdings to my shell companies. Dates match up with specific land acquisitions. Cole took the paper, studied it. This is specific. It's real, and there's more where that came from. 20 boxes worth of documents I kept as insurance. They're in a private vault in Denver, registered under a false name. I give you the name, the access codes, and you get everything you need to burn their entire operation to the ground. Why keep records at all? Evan asked. If you knew they were dangerous. Because powerful men dispose of their tools when they're done with them. I wasn't going to be disposed of without leaving a mark. Crosswell leaned forward. Do we have a deal or not? Cole looked at Brennan. The marshal's expression was carefully neutral, but Evan could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was legitimate intelligence that could crack open a conspiracy far larger than Crosswell's operation. But it was also a deal with a man who'd orchestrated murders and ruined lives. I need to consult with Webb, Brennan said finally. This is beyond my authority. They left Crosswell in the cell and gathered in the warden's office. Webb arrived within an hour, looking harried and intense. He read the sample documents 3 times before speaking. This is real, Webb said. I recognize these account numbers from other investigations. If Crosswell has more like this, we can build a case that'll shake the entire territorial power structure. And we have to make a deal with a murderer to get it, Cole said. Yes? We do. Webb didn't look happy about it. I don't like it either. But this is bigger than Crosswell. Bigger than any one case. These 7 men have been operating with impunity for years, maybe decades. If we can stop them, we save thousands of families from what happened in Harlan's Creek. At what cost? At the cost of giving one man a slightly less terrible prison and maybe some years off his sentence. It's a trade, Ardan. An ugly one, but that's what justice looks like when you're dealing with systemic corruption. Cole was quiet for a long time. Evan watched him work through the calculation, weighing the value of principles against the value of results. It was the same calculation they'd been making since this started. How much compromise was acceptable in pursuit of something better. Make the deal, Cole said finally. But I want guarantees, real ones. Crosswell testifies against all 7 financiers, gives us everything he promised. And if any of it turns out to be false, the deal's void, and he goes back to maximum security. Agreed, Webb said. I'll draw up the paperwork. The deal was formalized over the next week. Crosswell was transferred to a medium security facility in Colorado, not the minimum security he'd asked for, but better than where he'd been. He provided the vault information, and federal agents retrieved 23 boxes of documents that laid out a conspiracy spanning 4 territories in 12 years. The arrests started 2 weeks later. A railroad executive in Denver, a senator in Santa Fe, a territorial judge in Cheyenne who'd ruled in favor of fraudulent land sales 100 times. Each arrest triggered more investigations, more revelations, more people suddenly desperate to make deals of their own. The whole system started collapsing inward, powerful men turning on each other to save themselves. It was ugly and chaotic and exactly what Webb had hoped for. Cole and Evan watched it unfold from a distance, reading newspapers in towns they'd never see again. The stories got bigger and more sensational with each arrest. Magazines sent correspondence. Reform candidates started winning elections on platforms of cleaning up corruption. We did this, Evan said one night in a hotel in Pueblo. Started this whole cascade. No, Cole corrected. Crosswell did this. We just made him pay for it. There's a difference. Is there? We're the ones who chased him down, forced his hand, brought everything into the light. And he's the one who built an empire on stolen land and murdered families. Don't confuse cause and effect. Evan wanted to argue, but Cole was right. They'd been catalysts, not creators. The corruption had existed long before they'd arrived. They'd just exposed it, and exposure had consequences. One of those consequences arrived in Pueblo 3 days later. His name was Marcus Whitfield, and he was the last of the 7 financiers still free. The other 6 had been arrested, charged, and were awaiting trial. But Whitfield had disappeared the day after Crosswell's deal went public. Federal marshals had been hunting him for weeks with no success. Turned out he'd been hunting too. Evan was walking back from dinner when someone grabbed him from behind and pressed a gun to his spine. He froze, calculating angles and distances and coming up with nothing good. "Don't move," a voice said. "Don't call for help. Just walk where I tell you." They moved through alleys and back streets until they reached an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, Cole was already there, hands bound, bleeding from a cut above his eye. 3 men stood guard over him, and in the center of it all stood Marcus Whitfield. He was in his 60s, well-dressed despite being on the run, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before greed and cruelty carved it into something harder. "Mr. Ardan," Whitfield said, "and Mr. Holt, I've been looking forward to this conversation." "Conversation's a generous word for kidnapping," Cole said. "So is justice for what you've done to my life." Whitfield walked closer. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? The business relationships? The political alliances? The carefully constructed networks that took decades to build? All of it gone because you couldn't let one small operation in Kansas resolve itself quietly." "Small operation," Evan repeated. "You mean the one where people died?" "People die every day. That's commerce. That's progress. The weak make way for the strong, and civilization advances." Whitfield's voice was calm, rational, like he was explaining basic economics. "What you and your prosecutor friend don't understand is that we were building something, creating value where there was none, turning worthless prairie into productive assets. By killing the people who lived there," Cole said, "by removing obstacles to development, there's a difference. Not to the people you removed." Whitfield smiled. "And that's why men like you never build anything lasting. You're too sentimental, too concerned with individual suffering to see the larger picture. The larger picture being your bank account, among other things. But yes, my compensation was appropriate to the value I created." Whitfield pulled out a gun, small caliber, probably a Derringer. "None of which matters now. You've destroyed my life's work, forced me into hiding, turned my partners against me, so I'm going to take something from you in return." "Our lives," Evan said. "Eventually. But first, I want you to understand what you've actually accomplished." Whitfield gestured, and one of his men brought out a stack of newspapers. "You think you've won, that arresting 6 financiers and 1 land grabber means the system is fixed. You're fools." He threw the newspapers on the floor. Evan could see the headlines. "Reform candidate withdraws after scandal. New land development, bill passes territorial senate. Corruption trials delayed indefinitely." "The system protects itself," Whitfield said. "Always has, always will. You removed some players, but the game continues. New men are already stepping into our roles. Different names, same methods. 10 years from now, people will have forgotten about Crosswell and Harlan's Creek. The reforms will have been quietly repealed, and men like me will be back in power because power is the only constant." "You're probably right," Cole said. Whitfield blinked. "What?" "I said you're probably right. The system probably won't change. Probably can't change, not fundamentally. Men like you will always find ways to hurt people for profit." "Then what was the point? Why fight so hard for something that won't last?" Cole smiled, and there was something in it that made Whitfield step back. "Because fighting matters. Because the families in Harlan's Creek got their land back. Because Luke Hale gets to grow up on his father's homestead instead of an orphanage. Because for right now, in this moment, things are slightly better than they were." "That's not enough. It's all we've got. You want permanent solutions to systemic problems? You're looking in the wrong place. We're just men with guns trying to make sure fewer people get hurt. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. But we try. And trying is better than accepting that suffering is inevitable." Whitfield stared at him. "You really believe that?" "I really do." "Then you're even more foolish than I thought." Whitfield raised the Derringer. "Goodbye, Mr. Ardan." The gunshot was loud in the enclosed space, but it didn't come from Whitfield's gun. It came from the warehouse entrance, where Luke Hale stood with a rifle that was almost as tall as he was. Whitfield staggered, grabbing his shoulder. His men spun toward this new threat. Luke fired again, working the rifle's action with practiced efficiency. One of the guards went down. The others dove for cover. In the chaos, Cole twisted free of his bonds. They'd been loose, Evan realized. Cole had been working on them the whole time, and grabbed the nearest guard's weapon. Evan drove an elbow into his captor's face and broke free. The fight was brutal and close. Evan grappled with one guard while Cole shot another. Luke's rifle cracked twice more, and suddenly it was just them and Whitfield, bleeding and angry and cornered. "How?" Whitfield gasped. "How did you know?" "We didn't," Cole said, but Luke did. The boy walked forward, rifle still trained on Whitfield. I've been following you for 3 weeks, since you left Santa Fe. Figured you'd come after the men who destroyed your operation eventually. You're just a child. I'm the child whose father you had killed. That makes me old enough. Whitfield looked between them, a legendary gunfighter, a reformed criminal, and a 12-year-old with a rifle. And something broke in his face. The arrogance drained away, leaving just exhaustion and defeat. So what now? Whitfield asked. You kill me? Turn me over to the law? We turn you over, Cole said. The law can handle it from here. The law won't hold me. I have resources, connections, maybe. But you'll have to work for it. And every day you spend fighting charges is a day you're not building new schemes. Cole lowered his gun. That's what victory looks like in this fight. Not permanent solutions. Just making it harder for men like you to hurt people. They bound Whitfield and his surviving men and waited for the federal marshals Luke had already summoned. The boy had planned this whole rescue, tracked them across Pueblo, and executed it with a precision that was impressive and a little frightening. When the marshals had taken Whitfield away, Evan turned to Luke. You didn't have to come after us. Yeah, I did, Luke said simply. Why? Because you came after the men who killed my father. Because you gave our town back. Because, Luke's voice faltered, because you're the closest thing to family I've got left out here. Evan felt something crack in his chest. Luke, I know. You're leaving, going to the next fight. That's what men like you do. The boy shouldered his rifle. But before you go, I wanted to make sure you stayed alive long enough to keep fighting. Cole spoke up. What about you? What's your plan? I'm going back to Harlan's Creek. Sarah Chen offered to let me stay with her family until I'm old enough to run the homestead myself. I'll work her land, learn farming, maybe go to school if they ever build one. Luke looked at them both. I thought about following you, becoming a gunfighter, chasing bad men. But that's not what my father would have wanted. What did he want? Evan asked. He wanted me to be better than the world that killed him. To build instead of destroy. To make something that lasts. Luke's smile was sad and old. So that's what I'm going to do. They stood there in the aftermath of violence, 3 people connected by tragedy and choice. Then Luke walked away, back toward a town he'd help rebuild, and a future that wasn't defined by revenge. Evan and Cole watched him go. He's going to make it, Evan said. Yeah, Cole agreed. He is. The final arrests came over the next month. Marcus Whitfield was charged and convicted. The remaining financiers took plea deals or fled the country. The territorial governments instituted reforms, some meaningful, some performative. The newspapers declared the corruption scandal resolved and moved on to newer stories. Victor Crosswell served 2 years in medium security before being transferred to witness protection. He disappeared into whatever life the federal government built for informants who'd betrayed everyone they'd ever worked with. James Keller died in protective custody of pneumonia. The newspapers gave him 2 paragraphs, and most people forgot his name within a week. Marshal Brennan got promoted to regional marshal and spent the next decade chasing similar cases with the same dogged determination. Prosecutor Marcus Webb built a career on the Crosswell conviction, eventually becoming a territorial attorney general who actually tried to live up to the title. Harlan's Creek rebuilt. Sarah Chen's sons started a lumber business. Pete's Saloon became the social center of a town that slowly remembered how to be more than afraid. The railroad came through eventually, but on terms that didn't require families to lose their homes. Luke Hale grew up working land that had cost his father's life. He never picked up a gun again, except for hunting. Married at 22. Had 3 kids who never knew a world where their grandfather's murder was anything but a sad story from before they were born. And Cole Ardan rode into the sunset one last time, except it wasn't dramatic and there was no sunset. Just a quiet afternoon in late November when he saddled his horse and pointed himself toward Colorado and whatever came next. Evan went with him. They rode for 3 months, chasing smaller cases, helping where they could, learning that the work was never finished but also never entirely futile. They made small differences in forgettable towns, saved a few lives, stopped a few schemes, and left each place slightly better than they'd found it. Until one morning in a hotel in Denver, Evan woke to find Cole's bed empty. There was a note on the dresser. Just 3 lines in Cole's neat handwriting. Time for the legend to end. You don't need it anymore. You never did. C.A. Evan read it twice, then walked to the window. The street below was empty except for a man on a horse, riding away from the sunrise. Evan couldn't see his face from this distance, but the way he sat, slightly favoring his left side, hat tilted just so, was unmistakable. Cole Ardan was leaving. Not dying dramatically in a gunfight, not settling down in some quiet town. Just leaving, the way legends do when they finally accept that they're just men underneath the stories. Evan never saw him again. There were rumors, of course. Someone claimed they saw Cole Ardan in Mexico. Someone else swore he was running a horse ranch in Montana under a different name. A newspaper reported his death in a shootout in Arizona, but the details didn't match and the body was never confirmed. The legend lived on because legends don't die. They just dissolve into myth and memory, becoming whatever version people need them to be. But the man was gone, and maybe that was the point. Evan stayed in Denver for a month, then drifted west. He found work as a lawman in a small Wyoming town that needed someone who understood how to fight corruption from the inside. It wasn't glamorous. Mostly it was paperwork and mediating disputes, and occasionally standing up to people who thought power meant immunity. But it mattered. Each case, each family helped, each scheme stopped. They mattered. Not enough to change the system, not enough to prevent the next Crosswell or Whitfield from appearing, but enough to make the present moment slightly better than it had been. He wrote to Luke once a year, brief letters updating the kid on where he was and what he was doing. Luke wrote back with news from Harlan's Creek, who'd married, who'd died, whose crops had failed, and who'd had a good year. They never talked about what had happened, didn't need to. It was there in every sentence, every carefully chosen word. They'd both survived something that should have broken them, and survival was its own kind of victory. 10 years after Harlan's Creek, Evan was appointed territorial marshal for Wyoming. He served for 12 years, cleaning up corruption where he found it, training younger lawmen to do the same. He never married, never settled into anything that looked like peace. But he built something. Not a monument or a legend or a permanent solution to systemic problems, just a body of work that said he'd tried, that he'd worn his own name and done the best he could with who he'd become. And maybe that was enough. The world didn't change. The same patterns repeated with different actors. Land grabs and corruption, and powerful men hurting vulnerable people continued, because power doesn't regulate itself and systems don't fix themselves without pressure. But in the spaces between those patterns, in the individual moments and specific choices, people fought back. They rebuilt towns. They protected families. They stood up when it was easier to stay down. And sometimes, not always, not even usually, but sometimes, they won. Not permanently, not perfectly, but won nonetheless. Evan Holt died at 63 of natural causes, in the same Wyoming town where he'd served as marshal. His funeral was attended by people he'd helped and people he'd arrested and people who just knew him as the quiet man who'd never quite shaken the look of someone carrying weight. They buried him on a hill overlooking prairie that stretched endlessly in all directions. The same kind of land that had started all of this, beautiful and harsh and indifferent to human struggle. Luke Hale came to the funeral. He was in his 40s by then, weathered from decades of farming, with children and grandchildren who carried names from both sides of his family's tragedy. He stood at the grave and remembered a man who'd threatened his father, and then spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it. Did he? Someone asked, Luke's oldest son, curious about the man they were burying. Did he what? Make up for it. What he did. Luke thought about it. No. You can't make up for something like that. But he spent 40 years trying anyway. That has to count. They covered the grave and spoke the words people speak at funerals, about memory and legacy and the impact one life can have. Most of it was true. Some of it was generous. All of it was an attempt to make sense of a man who'd been both perpetrator and redeemer, who'd worn a borrowed name and spent decades earning his own. As people drifted away, Luke stayed behind. He stood there alone, looking at the fresh earth and the simple marker that read, Evan Holt, Territorial Marshal. He tried. Thank you, Luke said to the silence and the man beneath it, for everything, for the mistakes and the redemption, for showing me that doing the right thing doesn't erase the wrong thing, but it's still worth doing. The wind was his only answer, moving across prairie grass that had survived droughts and fires, and the endless cycle of death and growth. Luke walked back to his wagon where his family waited. They'd drive home to Harlan's Creek, to land that was theirs because people had fought for it. Land that would pass to his children and their children, carrying stories that would eventually become simplified and mythologized and partially forgotten. But the land would remain, and the people on it would keep building and breaking and trying to be better than their worst moments. That was the only victory that mattered, the only one that was possible. The legend of Cole Ardan continued for another generation, growing in the telling until the real man was buried under stories of impossible heroism and perfect justice. Eventually, people stopped believing he'd been real at all. He became a dime novel character, a myth, a symbol of a frontier that probably never existed the way people remembered it. And maybe that was appropriate. Maybe legends were never meant to be real. They were meant to be the story people needed, the narrative that said good could triumph and justice could prevail and individual choices could matter. The truth was messier. The truth was Cole Ardan had been a man who'd killed people and saved people and eventually walked away from both. The truth was Evan Holt had worn a borrowed name and brought death to a town and spent 40 years trying to balance scales that couldn't be balanced. The truth was Luke Hale had grown up with grief and anger and chosen to build instead of destroy. The truth was that systems don't change easily, that corruption finds new forms, that power protects itself. But the truth was also that people fought back, that families rebuilt, that small victories mattered even when they didn't last. And in the end, maybe that was the only moral worth taking from any of this. That trying matters. That choosing to be better than your worst moment matters. That fighting for something slightly less terrible than what exists matters. Not because it changes everything, but because it changes something. And something is better than nothing, always.